Good afternoon, everyone. It's David Schlotthauer here, and welcome back to another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion for Friday, June 20th, 2025. In this tropical weather update, we're going to be taking a look at the main development region and when we could see the potential for tropical development for the early and the middle part of July, as the pattern is about to flip. Here's a look at the latest GOES 19 True Color Visible Satellite Imagery provided by Dr. Levi Cowan at tropicaltidbits.com. There will be a link in the description below this video. And what we have right now is a very dry, stable atmosphere across the main development region. You can see the stratocumulus clouds moving from east to west, which indicates that we have really warm, really dry, stable air, what we call the Saharan air layer. Even so it's not really dusty here, that really doesn't matter because it is pretty stable out here. And so far, the Atlantic is going to finish off June on a very, very quiet, unusual note. But now, while it is unusual, it is also common to see very quiet Junes, even in very busy hurricane seasons. Now, what we do have down here is a pretty good looking tropical wave. Now, some of the models like the European Ensemble is picking this up a little bit with some chances of tropical development, but because it's going to be ramming it straight into Venezuela over the next 2 to 4 days, there is no potential that this tropical wave is going to develop, although it is going to bring in some pretty hefty rainfall and some breezy winds because of those trade winds, but otherwise no development is expected with that system. Although the Eastern Pacific, though, is going to remain active over the next week before that basin starts to wind down gradually. Now, while the Eastern Atlantic here looks pretty quiet with a lack of tropical wave activity coming off of Africa, that is going to be changing once we go into the early part of July as our intertropical convergence zone, our monsoonal trough, gets to be more active. Our trade winds slacken a lot, and we get a wind reversal down here where we do get our westerly winds bumping up against the African coast. And we can see this here on our latest 12Z GFS model. This is the American model, looking at the forecast here over the next couple of weeks. And as we can see here, throughout the day today and throughout the next week, we're going to have this strong Bermuda high that is going to remain anchored here in the subtropics, helping to produce some pretty strong trade winds throughout the Caribbean and the main development region. But as we go into the early part of July here, when we fast forward this, you can see, of course, we're not looking for any tropical development right away. We're looking at early signals that could give us a busier period ahead, especially when we go into the early and the middle part of July. So putting this into motion here over the next 5 days, we can see trade winds look pretty strong. We got something developing in the Eastern Pacific. And then as we go over the next 7 days, nothing much going on. But this high up here slowly begins to erode away and fall apart. And what that's going to help to do here is it's going to help to get the tropical monsoon going in Western Africa. And we're going to start seeing more vorticity signatures like this moving off of Africa. Now, this does not mean we will see tropical development because there is still plentiful of drier air to the north of these waves, but it is an early signal that we look for when it comes for the pattern to gradually change. And when we put this even further into day 10, this is what it looks like. Nothing much, but look at this. In the last week or so of this model run into early July, we start to see things change here. Yes, we have our Bermuda high that is not as strong here. It's going to really fall apart gradually. But look what happens. We get westerly winds here. The winds actually curve back along and back into the western portion there of Africa, as well as portions there of the Cabo Verde Islands off of Africa. And so this is an area that we will need to watch very closely for more enhanced convection, stronger tropical waves coming off of Africa for the early part of July. And then you can see that closes off, and then another tropical wave comes off of Africa while this Bermuda high remains well intact, not as strong, but is also not very weak. We can even see this on the European model as well. When we take a look at that forecast, it is quite similar to the GFS model, and that's why we like to look at different models for reference points. And then we're going to also look at the Canadian model because it shows something quite similar. So when we look at the European model, Of course, this is hard to see, but it's pretty much the same plot system. We're going to just fast forward through this. Actually, you know what? We're going to bring up our surface wind. That's going to be a little bit better too, so you guys can see where the land masses actually are. And when we go out in time here, out to day 5, day 6, nothing unusual, but look what happens. Look at this. The trade winds really fall apart here. They're much weaker than it being over here. Look how much stronger and suppressive the atmosphere is versus when we go further out in time. And that's what we look for here when it comes to the development of this monsoonal trough off of Africa. And then as we go into early July, it really shows up here. Look at this. This is pretty significant for the 3rd of July, where we have westerly winds. Yes, winds coming out of the west now, not out of the easterly direction where we have a more suppressed phase of the ITCZ or ITF. And that continues all the way into the first full week of July, where we have much lighter trade winds up here to the north. And of course, much weaker trade winds and a reversal in those winds across the deep tropics here of the Atlantic. Now, once again, I'm going to make it very clear in this video. This does not mean we will see tropical development. It does not guarantee that we will see something form at all. But what it just means is the background state is slowly becoming more conducive for the formation of these tropical waves that have the opportunity of becoming stronger as they come off of Africa. And once we get rid of that drier air, things will become even more favorable. So the Canadian model is very similar in this output. You can see a reduction in the trade winds over here and even westerly flow backing into Africa while we have this easterly flow. And if these come close enough together where we get a stronger gradient, that's when we will need to watch for vorticity stretching and energy that bundles up along the intertropical convergence zone. All right, so now with that being said, let's take a look now at our ensembles. And this is another look at our 850 millibar zonal wind anomaly. So any areas here in orange and red indicate westerly wind anomalies. So up here, our westerlies are stronger than they should be. And then down here in this purple, we have stronger easterly winds. The trade winds are stronger. The Bermuda high is stronger. And even we got easterly flow or easterly wind anomalies happening over the southeastern U.S. It's been quite windy there lately, and it's going to remain that way over the next week or two. But look what happens here. Once we go forward out in time, 4 to 8 days, look what happens. The flow really changes. The pattern, like the trade winds fall apart much quicker. And then our westerly winds really pick up here. Westerly wind anomalies or a very weak trade wind regime that sets up here. The Caribbean, the trade winds will definitely fall apart more significantly than what we're seeing right now, where they are very strong, up and around 25 to 40 miles an hour throughout the Caribbean now. But those trades will be relaxing once we go into early July. I pinky promise, we're looking at different models here that show us different things. Even the European ensemble is showing something very similar. So if we, again, trade winds strong here in the subtropics and the deep tropics, but look what happens. Boom, things flip. All right, we get westerly winds all the way across Western Africa, the deep tropics here of the Atlantic, and even perhaps in portions here of the Caribbean. Look at this. We got a little bit of a westerly wind anomaly setting up here over Hispaniola, over Jamaica, over eastern Cuba. And this just means that this sets the tone for a significant warming of our sea surface temperatures. So while they are slightly above average now with our upper ocean heat content that is near average to slightly below average in the Caribbean, that's going to change very quickly. Even in very busy seasons, we have seen sea surface temperatures flip a full 180 very, very quickly in a matter of about a month and a half. That's all it takes here with a very high sun angle, and given the fact that it is summer solstice and the sun 90 degrees above the horizon happens right about in here across the in latitude. So that means our oceans are getting as much heat and as much incoming solar radiation as they can for the continuation of surface heating. Now, looking at the Canadian ensemble as well, this is very similar to our other models that we looked at, showing again the westerly wind anomalies that do set up. So there is a strong signal between our deterministic forecast as well as our ensembles, indicating that these winds out here in the deep tropics will certainly relax a lot more than where they are at right now. And we do expect some significant oceanic heating to take place once we go into early to the middle of July. And that's going to be a huge game changer when it comes to how things are going to set up. So looking at basically with what we're looking at here over the next 7 days here in the deep tropics, I have to adjust this really quick. You can see nothing is expected here over the next 7 days in the deep tropics, which is nice. But again, that's not going to last forever. Even in really busy seasons that I'm going to show you here, we have had a very inactive June. While July, we might see 1 or 2 named storms. That's very normal. It's not usually until we get into August and September when the tropics just light up with activity. So this is normal. Climatology is hard at work here, and we're supposed to see no activity here in the month of June. Only in hyperactive seasons like 2020 did we get a very busy June, which is very, very rare in itself. Now, with that all being said, with our global computer models and those forecasts that we looked at over the next couple of weeks with the reversal in our trade winds that are expected by early July, we also want to take a look now at our analogs for past busy hurricane seasons. And this is very, very important because sea surface temperature anomalies here do matter a whole lot with how busy hurricane seasons can be in the Atlantic. So we're going to be looking at a lot of different years here. And first, we're going to be looking at 2019, and then we're going to go back in time with how those seasons ended up being. And so this was a pretty busy season. We had Dorian this year. This was definitely an impactful season. And when we look at our sea surface temperature anomaly configuration, we did have a fairly warm, not overly warm main development region, and the Caribbean was near average for that season, with the Gulf also slightly above average, not overly warm in the deep tropics here or even in the subtropics. We even had a weak La Nina in the Atlantic, or what we call an Atlantic Nina, and with a cold or a cooler than normal shallow water coming off of Africa there in the Cabo Verde Islands. So, and that led to a very robust season with Dorian being a Cat 5 hurricane. So let's take a look now at 2017. Here we had Irma and Maria that were Cat 5 hurricanes. So 2 Cat 5 hurricanes, even so we did not see 30 named storms. Let's take a look at what that looked like with sea surface temperature configuration anomalies. We had, again, the deep tropics here were not overly warm. We were not looking at 2.5 or even close to 3 degrees Celsius of sea surface temperatures like we had last year. We have to understand that on how this all works. We had a somewhat cooler or near average subtropics. We had a near average Caribbean and Gulf as far as sea surface temperatures go, but only the thing that really rings a bell here is the fact that the MDR was warmer than average just by a little bit, with the Atlantic Nina being a very weak signal there, but it was there. It was just rather weak indeed. So that's 2017, and that gave us 2 serious hurricanes, Irma and Maria, that were both highly impactful hurricanes towards the Caribbean. Now, when we take a look at 2012 here, this is also a fairly busy year, not as busy as past years, but gave us a near average hurricane season. And we can see here clearly the main development region, as well as portions of the Caribbean, were running a little bit above average with not much of an Atlantic Nina signal. But what rings the bell is we were also developing an El Nino out here in the Eastern Pacific with a very cold PMM, or known as a Pacific Meridional mode. That's what it looked like. And that's what I believe why we had a somewhat active season with at least more than 13 or 14 named storms that year. And then When we take a look here at 2011, this was also a very busy season with the deep tropics here being notably warmer than average here, with a couple of areas where it was 2 degrees Celsius above the long term. Not necessarily in the Gulf or in the Caribbean, but out here in the MDR, despite the fact that we had a cold Atlantic Nina that has shown up. Not much of a horseshoe look here to the sea surface temperature configuration either, and despite the fact that we did have a rather warm, neutral, weak El Nino setting up, and man, a very, very cold PMM along the California coast back then. That was pretty substantial, actually, to say the least, and that really plays a role also in the Atlantic hurricane season when it comes to busy seasons. Now, 2010 was also a fairly robust season because our sea surface temperatures here were well above average in the deep tropics of the Atlantic, especially in the Caribbean and the Gulf, and in the Western Atlantic as well, with a very cold subtropical look here, but not much of that horseshoe look, and a weak Atlantic Nina. Okay, and now let's take a look at 2005. Now, of course, this is one of the busiest hurricane seasons on record. And in terms of ACE producing, it is one of the busiest hurricane seasons on record. Now, as far as named storms, 2020 takes the cake on that. But what I want you all to understand here is even during a hyperactive hurricane season, while this area of the deep tropics was running above average, look at our Atlantic Nina. That was a very, very, very intense Atlantic Nina that was in place there, with sea surface temperatures that were 3 degrees below the climatological norm. So what I'm trying to say here is, even so we do have this, we can still have a very busy Atlantic hurricane season. It just prevents it from being as active as it could be without it. But as far as I can see, I don't think this season is going to be somewhat active for sure. There's just a mixed mode here that we're going to be looking at when we take a look at our next slide. But yeah, definitely warm out there in the subtropics during that season. And let's jump into today. All right, so this is what today looks like. Again, very similar look here in the subtropics where it is slightly warmer than average, the Caribbean being near average, and the Gulf being well above average for this time of the year. But what is concerning here is where this warmth up here takes place. If this scoots down further south and we develop some cooler than normal sea surface temperatures here in the subtropics, and we have that horseshoe look when it comes to the sea surface temperature anomaly configuration, then that usually asks for a very busy Atlantic hurricane season, when in theory it can still be a very hyperactive season. There is a lot of changes that are going to be made here, and July is going to be a very big critical month when it comes to sea surface temperature warmth here, with very light trade winds that are expected at least in the first couple of weeks of July. How much warming do we see here? Does it get even further above average? Do we warm up more further and recover those anomalies in the Caribbean? That remains to be the question. And do we get rid of any warmth up here in the subtropics? That also plays a role here in our busy Atlantic season. Now, one thing that has been solidifiable on this map is a negative phase of the PMM and a negative phase of the relative oceanic Nino index, or what we call RONI for short. The RONI index and the PMM are both very negative, despite the fact that we have a little bit of a warm signal here in the Eastern Pacific. So, and that, given the fact that we're seeing that as a whole, the East Pacific here is below average relative to the Atlantic, and that's why there is still a signal here that possesses a busy hurricane season. It's just how busy. Will we see 15 named storms? Will we see 21 named storms? That is a question that we cannot answer in today's video, just because there's a lot of moving parts that are always at work. So now let's take a look here at inactive seasons. Like 2016 was a very inactive season, despite the fact that things were there. We had a very warm Atlantic look. However, though, there was competing factors here with above average sea surface temperatures in the Eastern Pacific. So there was a competitiveness to all of this, and there was not much of an imbalanced signal that would give the Atlantic a busy period. All right. And then when we take a look here at 2013, that was also a very inactive season. And that's just because, again, our pattern was not there, not much of a signal between the two basins, and the subtropics here and the deep tropics, I should say, were barely running ahead of where they should be for that time of the year. So that versus this, you can see the difference. If we go back and forth, there is definitely a signal that really asks for a busy season. Just how busy? Again, I don't have the answer in this video. Now, with that all being said, I sure hope you did enjoy today's detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion for June 20th, 2025 on this fantastic Friday. Happy summer solstice for all of those that are watching from the deep tropics here. I will have a live stream version of my tropical weather outlook and discussion tomorrow night at around 8 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. You do not want to miss that. Once again, 8 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time tomorrow night on Saturday, we will be hosting a live tropical weather outlook and discussion streaming version. And we're going to be looking even deeper into the tropics when I think our first named storm will be. But you can only do that if you do subscribe, hit the bell icon, hit the like button, and also leave a comment in the section below this video, and I'll be sure to reply to your all comments. I have not been able to do that the last day or two because I've been prepping more for you all for the Atlantic hurricane season for the busy period that is expected once we go into late August into early September. But anyways, I'll see you back here tomorrow night with a live stream.